Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. It's been a while since we've had the dynamic duo back. That's not Batman and Robin. It's Dr. Doug Lisle and Dr. Jen Hawk. They are the co-stars of the amazing podcast called Beat Your Genes. They're writing a book together that is very much anticipated by all of us. And today they're going to talk about the secrets to great relationships. Please welcome them both to the show. What a great topic, and great to see you both together again.
Great being here, AJ. Thanks for having us.
Yeah, awesome.
It's always my pleasure. And so what is the secret to a great relationship?
Well, there's all kinds of different things because relationships, we weren't just talking about romantic relationships, we're talking about all relationships. And so there's relationships by nature are what they are is they're trades. And we actually don't like it when for example, when a romance starts to go from something that is very easy to something that starts looking very transactional. But what that is that's it's kind of like what happens when you are in some kind of like a job that you were crazy about, and now you start haggling about the terms with the people in HR, like it's not as good. So but beneath it, we always know that if it's even a job that you love, that there's still a trade process taking place. And that realization that relationships are in fact trades, a lot of parts of the trade are happening unconsciously and they're happening joyfully, but they are trades nonetheless. And that includes your relationships with your children. And that includes relationship with your parents and with your friends and with everybody else, and certainly romantic partners. And so so first, knowing that that's true, what trades mean is that there's value for value on both sides of the process, but there will also inevitably be conflicts of interest. And that is really what's a super important thing to understand about relationships. Sometimes, obviously, young people, if they fall in love, they feel like everything is so fabulous because that's like you had your dream job and somebody offered you a whole bunch of money to do it. And you're like, oh my God, what could be better than this? And then somewhere along the line, you find out that you don't agree on everything or that there's a conflict. And it can actually be felt like it's kind of a tragedy. Like, wait a minute, I didn't think that we were supposed to have conflicts. Oh my God, what is this? Does this mean that our love isn't true, and et cetera, et cetera? And the answer is absolutely not. We have to understand that conflicts are not a tragedy in relationships. They're an intrinsic part of the nature of life. That two people cannot be always in agreement about how we value everything that may come up. What relationships are is they're opportunities for trades. When we try to make them to be without conflict because we're supposed to agree on everything, then we set the stage for big trouble. Okay, and we'll be talking a little bit about some of the ways that how that winds up looking. So actually, how we manage conflicts is probably the most important thing that we can have some control over in determining how enjoyable relationships are. Because we can't make a relationship better than it could intrinsically be, but we can make it worse than it could be intrinsically be, okay? So, and so we'll end up talking about that today. The concept of conflict and how it is that we manage it is a really important part to the quote secrets of good relationships. The first secret of a good relationship is the two people have to have things about each other that they really value in order to make a good relationship even possible. Okay? You can't have a good relationship with the old grouch next door who likes to hunt and you're an animal rights activist. I mean, this is just not going to happen. But when the two people of who they are intrinsically have within the possibility a good relationship of some kind, then the only question is, how are we going to manage the conflicts when they come up? And if we manage it well, can we have a good relationship, or will we manage it poorly and then we detract from it? And that's sort of so it's the notion of relationships, their potential, and how to best manage conflicts. That's kind of what the secrets are. That's where they sit. Jen,
Yeah.
other thoughts about that?
Yeah, well, to borrow a phrase you often use, to back the camera up here,
Yeah.
I would say that, we're interested in talking about this because we, so often when you're having relationship issues, especially romantic issues, but any kind of relationship, and you go in to see somebody about it to try to get help working on your communication or, to address the issue at some level, the immediate sort of move that practitioner goes to is to look at your childhood, to kind of look at, where did your intimacy issues come from today? Or, why are you struggling to communicate because of something that you learned in your childhood? And part of the reason we want to have this conversation is to kind of bring a different toolkit that we use and that's grounded in evolutionary psychology, which, is much more of a practical model. It's a relative of cognitive behavioral therapy, if you've heard of that, in the sense that it's really more problem solving oriented. It's less interested in kind of the roots of the issue and more about, okay, what's going on with this dynamic and how can we fix it? But as Doug is saying, it begins with understanding why the conflict is, what the real nature of the conflict is, understanding why it's happening and what kind of power struggle is going on, and then figuring out how much of that is, in the words of John Gottman, who is a fairly traditional relationship therapist, who I like a lot, I think Doug does too, there are solvable problems in relationships and there are also unsolvable problems in relationships. And every relationship has both. Just because you have some unsolvable problems doesn't mean that it's doomed, that you can't be together or you can't be happy. But you have to understand what you're dealing with and that is an unsolvable problem and what the nature of that is and how you can live with it rather than just being mad about it all the time. So I think one of the ways we thought we would kind of get into this is that we can take questions that are relationship oriented if people have issues coming up in any type of relationship, and we can kind of apply some of our main frameworks and tools as those come up. But we can also just talk generally about stuff.
Yeah.
Sure.
Well, somebody's asking, well, are there some problems, like what is an example of an unsolvable problem, or does that depend on the relationship?
It depends on the relationship a bit. I think the way he defines it, it's going to be a problem that is rooted in fundamentally different personalities. So as Doug is saying, if you're an animal rights activist and you're trying to date a hunter, that's going to be an unsolvable problem. Doesn't mean that you can't be together, that's a successful arrangement in some rom-coms.
Yeah.
if he has a heart of gold and you're able to kind of make it work, but it's an unsolvable problem in the sense that it is emerging from very deep innate differences between those two individuals that cannot be changed. So the classic unsolvable problem is he's an extrovert, she's an introvert. So this is like a fundamental personality trait, and it's not going to change. So all things equal, he wants to go out, he wants to visit his friends, he wants to go to dinner parties, she wants to stay home, cuddle, watch Netflix, be quiet. And so there are compromises that are required here, and it's a matter of sorting through how that compromise best serves both of those parties. But you have to realize that nobody's going to be entirely getting their way because you have this fundamental difference. She doesn't have to learn to be more extroverted or push through her boundaries of being uncomfortable in social situations. And he doesn't have to, be happy staying at home and not getting the social cues that he craves. There is a different sort of compromise rather than the two of you need to fundamentally change who you are.
Do you guys think that saying opposites attract is true? Because a lot of introverts and extroverts seem to end up together.
No, it's actually not true. So we know that's not true. So I'm not just having an opinion on this. This is well known in personality psychology and relationship research that smart people are not attracted to people with low ability. Low ability people are not attracted to very smart people. Strangely enough, I mean, you might think that it was, but it is not true. Okay, so the extroverts are not particularly attracted to introverts, nor vice versa. And disagreeables may be attracted to agreeables.
That's the one exception.
Yes, yeah. That's the exception. The very stable people are not attracted to unstable people. So,
Sometimes they are.
that,
Sometimes they are if it's a male-female dynamic. Males can find unstable females more attractive than stable females.
I think
They're exciting.
well, yeah, it depends upon how unstable.
Of course.
There's a principle here with this is going to be what we're going to call latitudes of acceptance.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, a person who's not too bright may be more attracted to a person who's a little bit brighter than them than a person who's less bright. But they're not attracted to a person who's much brighter because that's uncomfortable. Okay, and the same thing would be with, for example, I'm not that open, but I'm attracted to people who are one notch more open than I am. If you get two notches more open, and a notch to me, because I am the nerd that I am, that would be 10 percentile points. So
that's like, let's go to the Asian fusion restaurant instead of the Thai restaurant, but not bungee jumping.
Right.
Yeah. You're like, let's kick it up a notch.
Yes.
Yeah.
So that's how that works. And quite frankly, it's interesting. I think that if a person were 10 percentile less open than me,
Mm-hmm.
that would not be interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I that would be Alan. I'm not attracted to that. That's why this one's my new co-author, AJ. Is because we have to open it up a little. So, but anyway, this is So in general, opposites do not attract, but you are certainly attracted to people who are reasonably close to you on most dimensions. But you may have preferences. In other words, so I'm trying to think. My personal preference would probably be someone who's more outgoing than I am. In terms of, I'm pretty introverted. Somebody one notch more extroverted would be fine. One notch more introverted would be a little weird. My life would get pretty quiet at that point. So these are these sort of things that go on.
That's great.
We have other questions, AJ?
Yeah. Here's one from Elizabeth. How to pass by the physical attraction and see the person as they are?
How to pass by it? Well, I'll jump in here. There's a difference between passing. There's a difference between not, for example, particularly on the side of women looking at men when they don't know them. That when women are looking at men and they don't know the person, they have not integrated who that person is into the person's overall aesthetic. That will be something that will take place for better or worse. So as women get to know a person, who that man is, assuming we're talking about a heterosexual situation, who that person is becomes part of their aesthetic response. Okay, and it may improve their aesthetic response, or it may detract from it. It may improve it, but it still doesn't make it interesting. It may detract from it, and then it's a complete rule out. But so women could be lukewarm early, and then it will change, and we don't know where it's going to change to. But if the person is saying, I know this person, I'm with this person, and I might have been into him before, but now I'm not into him, or they keep coming on to me and I've known him for a long time, and they keep doing their little drive-bys to try to tap me on the shoulder, but I'm just not into him. Okay? Or I've been out with this guy half a dozen times and I just can't. I mean, he's a really good guy and he's got a lot going for him, but I'm just not into him. Well, you're out of luck. So the notion that you can somehow get past it and then be responding romantically, to quote who the person is impossible. It's important to understand that at the most fundamental level, you are an animal. You are an animal. Okay. Throughout the animal kingdom, we will find that vision is an incredibly important source of information in mate selection. Okay. It's true in chimpanzees. It's true in all kinds of birds. It's true in lions. It's true in tigers. It's true all over the place. It's true in zebras. It's true in penguins. Okay. So to try, just because human beings have a phenomenal amount of important information about who it is that they are, their identity is located inside of their mind. And so it turns out that it's an extremely important issue to determine who it is that they are, because that's an incredibly important feature of what you're going to be responding to and whether you're attracted to that individual as a human being and sexually or not. These are very big deals, but they could never be the only thing. Okay. We would expect, that's why you don't have some guy with a great personality, funny, pleasant, smart, clever, nice guy that looks average, and that is not a Hollywood movie star. Okay, that is not a movie star. Okay.
Well, he's not a matinee idol type movie star, but he might be a character actor.
Might be a character actor.
Yeah. So he might be an Oscar winner, very well known, but he's not people's sexiest man alive.
He's not the leading man that women go to spend their tickets so that they can sit inside the other female on the other side of this thing, and through mirror neurons be excited for her as she's kissing this guy. Okay. In other words, the way that works is she's got to look at this guy and be thinking, I'm very attracted to him, or forget it, it doesn't work. Okay. And so and it doesn't work if he's average. He's never going to be that leading man. That tells you how important vision is to the species. We should not apologize for it. We should not run away for it. We cannot get past it. Okay. It is what it is. We personally each have some amount of appeal to some percentage of the market. All of us would pretty much like to have unlimited appeal to the entire market. Of course, okay? Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't you want to be qualified for every job on the planet? And you'd be like, well, I did that neurosurgery thing for a few weeks. I really didn't like that much. Let me go on and be a nuclear physicist for a little while. Let me try that, okay? Of course, that would be a fascinating position to be in, but really nobody is there. So you might say, well, Brad Pitt was when he was in his heyday. No, he actually wasn't, okay? There's all kinds of women that would have ruled Brad Pitt out literally on sight, okay? Because there'd be features of him. And that's just vision. Then we get to smelling, okay? Smelling is a huge deal. There might be some gal who finds Brad Pitt extremely attractive, but when she got up close to him, can't stand his smell. And that's because their two immune complexes are too similar, and she's designed by evolution to be disgusted with that, because essentially he smells like her brother. Okay, so these are then it can be how it is that they touch, okay, or their voice and what it is that they sound like,
or other little physical characteristics,
Your mind is built around what we're going to call an adaptive unconscious. And that adaptive unconscious is running cost-benefit analyses constantly. And you are not aware of thousands of the variables that it's computing. You are aware of a few of them. There are big ones, a lot of them you can see, okay? Sometimes you can't. So the book that Jen and I are writing is about all these really interesting features of human nature, about the things that we can know and the things that we can't know, and what it is that some of the deep strategies that we need to learn in order to essentially make better decisions for a better life. And so, and one of them would be, don't think you're going to get past that. Okay, you have to. One of my favorite little phrases that goes back more than 40 years. I'm embarrassed to admit that I was an adult 40 years ago, but I was. And one of the books that crossed my plate was by Wayne Dyer, Dr. Wayne Dyer. And he said in that book, first, be a good animal. Now, I never forgot that, okay? And he didn't know as much as we would all come to learn about diet, but he had an intuition about it, okay? And so his notion was, let's first feel like a good animal, sleep when you want to sleep, exercise when you're feeling some energy behind that, work hard, all these sorts of things. And one of them would be honor your own aesthetic preferences. Okay. He didn't say that, but that would be implied. Honor your own aesthetic preferences. Don't try to make yourself like something that you don't like. What a waste of life. Okay. I can't make myself like, for example, watching tennis. Like I've watched a little bit of tennis in my time, and back in the days of Jimmy Connors and John McEnroe, when it was all argumentative and
yeah, no, that was exciting.
volatile.
They were throwing things and
Throwing
getting in fights, and yeah,
that was exciting.
that was like a soap opera. It wasn't tennis.
That's what that was. But it isn't that I don't respect tennis. It isn't that I don't to understand why other people find a lot of appeal. But that's not my game. So if I spent my life trying to make myself like that, as opposed to watching the NBA and the NFL, I would be wasting my life. Okay, so don't waste your life trying to like something that you don't like. Okay,
Can I add just one tweak on this for women in particular? I would say don't make the other mistake, which is not to give a good guy a chance. And so you touched on this at the beginning of your answer. This kind of women uniquely compared to men have this capability that we call the repeat exposure effect. So we talk about this all the time on our podcast. We talk about it almost every week we have a members only podcast that we do, video podcast for our members on our website. And repeat exposure is a big deal for women. And it used to happen sort of more organically in the workplace or in communities where you met a guy at church, or you met him in the bowling league, or you ran into him on sort of a repetitive basis for a certain amount of time, or it was your brother's friend who came around. And every woman I know has had this experience where he's not my type. He's not my type. And then one day he kind of does something that impresses you, or you see him in a new light, and you kind of look at him and you're like, I never thought of him that way before. That's a universal experience to the female nervous system. And that's repeat exposure, where someone can be sort of marginal, where you're not that attracted to them. You're not repulsed by them. So there's a sweet spot, right? There's kind of, it's just not your general type, and you probably couldn't see yourself with them, but they're not unattractive. It's just not your thing. And a lot of women, especially now in the world of dating apps, will just swipe by those guys. They don't give those guys a chance at all to kind of make their repeat exposure case. And that's the mistake on the other end of the spectrum. Yes. Is because, you do, not that you need to give every guy, a hearing, but if somebody sends you, who kind of fits that category on a dating app, and you're looking to date, a very thoughtful message, very personalized, really kind of obviously picking up on little things about you, and you wouldn't be attracted to him right out of the gate, but you're not entirely sure, you don't want to rule that person out without giving him a slight chance to prove himself. So there are mistakes to be made on both ends of this continuum, and that I see is a more common one among women in the online dating sphere, because we're sort of incentivized to move quickly and only swipe on the men that you're very attracted to. But that's a losing game for women, because they probably are not interested in you as a potential what we call a pair bond. They probably want to sleep with you because they want to sleep with everybody, but they don't want to make you their one. And that is just a dynamic that exists, and we can kind of get more into that if people are interested. But if you are super over rewarded by that picture that you see on Bumble, and you've never seen a guy that hot, and you swipe yes, and you want to go out with him, be careful, because that's probably, you're probably batting a little over your you're aiming a little too high there. So there is an art and a science to this.
Great. Thank you. Well, lots of questions are coming in, and I told them it has to be on the topic of relationships. Here's one from a live viewer named Maria. I'm in an 8-month relationship, and so far, no major conflicts. How can I get faster feedback on how he manages conflict? Assume it takes time, but I'm 33, want kids. So far, signs are great.
Oh, I love this question. Go on a road trip. Go on a road trip. Put that guy in situations where unexpected problem-solving occasions are in front of him. You want to see how he solves problems under pressure that he doesn't expect to have come up. And the most likely scenario for that is an extended road trip or traveling together. You want to see him frustrated, changing a tire on the side of a busy highway. That's going to tell you, really, really how he responds in those kinds of moments, how he interacts with you, how all of that plays out. That's the super rapid acceleration modality for discovering someone's mettle in a relationship. Is one of my favorites. So of course there are other ways to do it, but I really like that one.
Excellent. Go to Spain.
Yeah, go to a difficult country.
Signs. It's all.
Yeah. Spain's pretty easy. I'd take him to like El Salvador, somewhere you have to bribe a border guard.
There you go. There's the high openness.
But you want both of you. You want to see how he solves problems because you're trying to assess whether he qualifies for a pair bond for you, because problem solving is a very important skill. But you also you want to be under pressure, so you can the whole dynamic is going to shift. It's going to bubble up any potential conflicts of interest, anything that's been simmering under the surface and kind of held in place by everyone being on their very good behavior. You just want to turn the heat up on that.
Great, thank you. Randy says, how do I get my husband to talk more? Or any, she says.
Well, that is interesting. So that's we're going to speak to a couple of big concepts that will that are weaving their way through the book that we're writing, and that weave their way through how to solve all kinds of problems. And that is, number one, we're going to call this the principle of identity. So Jen has already alluded to this, and that is that fundamentally we are who we are. You're not going to change that. All you can change inside of people, when the neuroscientists and hucksters today talk about plasticity of the brain, they are using smoke and mirrors, and they are completely confusing two entirely different operations, and they're pretending that apples are oranges. So we're going to talk about what's an apple and what's an orange when it comes to what we call the principle of identity. If I had happened to had studied finance, some reason my dad was into that, and we had sort of pushed me that direction, and it was just too easy to stay out of it. And you were meeting me today, I would know a lot about taxes and sheltering and all this kind of bunch of stuff that I don't know. I would be the same personality. Okay, it would be I wouldn't. My interactions, the kind of music that I listened to wouldn't have changed. The kind of partner that I wanted wouldn't have changed. Nothing would have changed, but my knowledge of the environment would have changed. My knowledge of the environment would have been a knowledge of taxes and rules and all that sort of jazz and what you need to do by April 15th. My knowledge of the threats and opportunities would have changed. I wouldn't have known anything about diet, and I'd have 2 stents in this heart by now if I was even alive, given my genetics here. So I wouldn't be in nearly as good a physical condition. I wouldn't have done a lot of things that I've done, but I would have done other things. Okay, so the principle of identity is the identity doesn't change at all, but what changes is your understanding or knowledge of the environment. I have no idea what the question was. So I'm completely
get him to talk more. Not a problem for you.
You guys know why I love Jen Hawk. Oh my God, I can't live without her. Okay, so yes, getting him to talk. So there's one of 2 possibilities, and that is that this is part of his identity and it's never going to change. Okay, it is also possible that his understanding of the environment could change because his environment can change. So I will tell you an old clinical story that I learned from Nathaniel Brandon, who was the person responsible for me becoming a psychologist. Okay, so who's the author of The Psychology of Self-Esteem 50 years ago. The Brennan talked about a case once, and it was a young woman married to a guy she loved, and he was an attorney. And he would come home every night, and she would want to talk to him about his day. And he'd be like, no, you wouldn't understand. And he was just so tired and burned out. And this went on for quite a while. And I can't remember how she changed this, but it might have been because of Brandon's intervention. It probably was. And the idea was, listen, if you really want this to happen, you're going to need to learn about what it is that is the heart of what's in his mind that he's concerned about. So this young lady then went to the library and got herself knowledgeable about the area of law that this guy practiced. Okay, and then she asked him questions. Then turned out he was freaking delighted to talk. So the man who wouldn't talk would absolutely talk once he found out, she's sending him a tremendous signal of how interested she is in him. So, quote, getting your husband to talk, let's look carefully about what is it you want him to say, okay? If you want him to say, oh my goodness, it'd be so much fun to go arrange flowers with you on the weekends, and he doesn't want to arrange flowers on the weekends, and you want to have that conversation because you really like to be out at the flower arranging place because other women are there with their husbands that are being adoring, and you would like to parade around your guy and show that you've got one too, and that it'd be so nice to do this together. You're violating all kinds of principles about how to have success in relationships, i.e. you're violating the principle of identity. You're also violating another principle that we call the optimal overlap. So as Jen said earlier, you can have very significant disagreements, but we may not be able to have the relationship at that nexus where you have the disagreements. We may be able to have the relationship in places where we don't disagree. So you may have a great relationship in places where you can, and then when you can't, then you don't bother to try to make it so. So if that guy, so the question is, does he not want to talk? Does he not want to talk to you? Does he not want to talk to you about what it is that you're wanting to talk about? What exactly is the situation there? There is no neuroplasticity in the universe that is going to change that man's identity about who it is that he is. The only thing that can change is that he may have a shift in his understanding about what would be in it for him if there was a conversation between the two of you. That would mean that what it is that he might be interested in talking about, you would have some interest, okay? And it wouldn't be like, no, Dr. Lisle, this is just priming the pump. I'll go ahead and learn a little bit about hockey sticks, and then I'll get him talking, and then we can talk about what I'm interested in talking about. No fair.
The grandkids and their school recitals.
We're violating the principle of identity.
Yeah.
Okay. So the question is there anything that you're really interested in that he would be really interested in talking about? That is your task to try to figure that out. And that would be really the only way that you're going to get this guy to talk in a way that is organic and sustainable.
If he's a talker, but he might not be a talker. So you know, I'm sure he was more talkative during courtship because his cost benefit analysis on talking was in a different place. He was trying to qualify for you. So he was trying to present himself in the best possible light. He was probably, I expect, very authentically interested in you, getting to know more about you, i.e. to decide whether he wanted to wife you up or not. Then he found out that you are, and so it's done. We can go back to baseline of just being a very quiet, introverted guy. So I would only be really worried about this if he was very quiet with you, but not when you're out at a dinner party and he's just talking to everybody and he's super social, but he never talks to you. That would indicate that there's a real overlap issue, and you're probably trying to talk to him about the wrong things, as Doug is explaining. But if he's quiet all the time and you just want him to be more like he was when you were dating, that was a whole different environmental context for him, and you can't really replicate that in the way that you would want to. It's about meeting him where he's at with his genuine baseline personality. Now that he has snagged you and feels more comfortable.
Oh, that's great.
I gotta write that down.
We have so many comments.
Very romantic.
Yeah, AJ.
I was just going to say that we have so many comments on how hot you look with your new goatee.
Yeah. Doug's sporting a new facial hair here. He's trying to send some testosterone cues.
I was just trying to send a cue to Jen that I'm serious about finishing the book. It's
your hermit beard. Are you not going to shave it until you finish the book?
I spent 3 days in the Oregon wilderness in this last week, away from everything, so that I could focus, and I got some good work done. And I know Jen's working hard, and that's what this is actually about. So I had no idea anybody would like it, for God's sakes. All right, thank you.
It definitely suits you. And there's a question from Sherry. This could probably be a whole show: how to deal with a narcissist.
Yeah. Well, first of all, what a narcissist is, people. So we don't. It's actually not a category of humans. It's a description of one component of their personality. And that component is disagreeable. So really the question is, how do you deal with a disagreeable person? And so then we're going to get into interesting problems that it comes to deal with disagreeable people. So I start calling people disagreeable when they're probably 75th percentile on the disagreeable curve. Then you're running into a lot of resistance from them on various and sundry issues. If someone disagrees with me now and then, but mostly agrees, then we're going to call that in the middle of the bell curve. Okay, so when they're about 95th percentile disagreeable, in other words, you just can't agree with them about that much. Whenever there's a conflict, they're getting all hot and bothered and irritable and difficult and threatening. That's a narcissist. So that's what I call that. But there's a few problems. Obviously, if you think about relationships as trades, and what a disagreeable person is a person who is feeling very often like the trade that you're proposing is not fair, i.e. they don't agree, okay? They're never going to change. This is part of their identity, principle of identity. So that doesn't ever change. And the question is, can you have a good overlap with a person who is very disagreeable? Can you have a relationship with them? And the answer is, you might. You're running a cost benefit on this entire package. People are not one feature. They're not just their beauty. They're not just their intelligence. They're not just their introversion or extroversion. They're not just how good a parent they would be. They're not just a person that has a certain financial capability. They are a package deal. Okay? A human being is a package deal. We don't get to snip out the little part that we don't like. No, it's coming along with it. And so the issue is, can our relationship be effectively snipping those things out as much as possible? And the answer is, to some degree, you can. In other words, if you like to go watch hockey, go watch hockey. I'll be here when you get back. I'll have been watching the NBA. So I can't imagine getting into a chick that likes hockey, but you never know. You never know. All right. So there's some problems with disagreeable people, and how we deal with them is usually it's going to have to do with how we manage arguments, because there's going to be arguments with disagreeable people, and with arguments, we have to understand that with argumentation in people, we're actually born to win. We're actually designed by nature to win arguments. We're not actually designed to resolve disputes. Those are very different things. And so this is heart and soul as to some of the things that we talk about in the Living Wisdom Library, and we also talk about in in the book that we're writing.
It's a whole chapter in the book. Yeah.
This is a big deal, that human nature has features of it that are not, that they are not all about peace and freedom and everything being cool. They're about getting more from me. If it costs you less, that's too bad. Okay, this is deep in human nature. It's deep in every animal nature. I've got one cat that outweighs the other cat by about 4 or 5 pounds and is inherently more aggressive. And if he's eating peacefully, she'll come right up to him. She'll purr, get right close to him, and then bring up her hand and swat him in the face and move over and take his food. Like, this is how it is. Okay, i.e., whatever you're liking so much, I'm going to take it. And so whatever it is that's a dispute between us and a recurrently disagreeable person, they are wanting more than we believe is fair. So we have a conflict over this. When that conflict emerges, tempers flare and people can get pretty nasty. Okay, and that's because we're born to win arguments. We're born to raise our voices, try to shame them in front of the rest of the village. We do that automatically, whether or not people are around or not. We do it anyway. We'll do it in the quiet of our own living room with our partner. They start raising their voice, we start raising our voice. And these arguments were designed to be resolved by the village within seconds, 45 seconds, 2 minutes would be a long argument. People aren't going to sit around and listen. But when we start kind of recounting our evidence, we are not taking a measured view of their opinion and our opinion. We are going for the jugular to try to win. It's a super important thing to understand about human nature. It's important for all of us to understand it. It is incredibly important if you live with a narcissistic individual. You live with a very disagreeable person. You are going to be in arguments a lot, and you are going to find yourself being threatened by their raised voice, and you are going to be responding in kind, and it's going to be unpleasant as hell. And that is what there will be. We hope that they're hot enough and interesting enough and smart enough and fun enough that it makes up for the fact that they're an incredible pain in the ass. Okay, now, but how can we best manage that? We can best manage that by understanding how it is to step out off of the born to win path. And so there's a few concepts that are useful that I have rarely been able to use. Fortunately, I don't have very many arguments with very many people. But a few times when I've started to have arguments and I knew, you know what, this person is important enough to me, this situation has enough chips in it, it's important enough, I better not just let my instincts go. Okay? So, but I have to have an alternative strategy. This is where we have, quote, neuroplasticity. Is that I've changed my personality. It's that I've learned that there's a different way to manage the environment. It's a completely different thing. Okay? It turns out that if I say to somebody, you've got a point. No, I see you've got a point. If I say that, then I'm changing the environment right in front of us both. Mm-hmm. They've been on a path to defend their honor with the village by recounting why I'm wrong and they're right. And they're loud and they're threatening and they're trying to essentially shame me into capitulation. I know that, and I'm responding in kind by raising my voice, figuring out where the weakness is in their argument and going for their jugular. That's what an argument is. That is the anatomy of human argument. If instead I immediately say, you've got a point, then suddenly they have something in their head as they hear it starts to put their foot on the brake. And that's because they realize, wait a minute, the village now isn't going to think that I'm so far out of line because he's acknowledging that I'm not that far out of line. So that's a huge concession. Okay. So that you've got a point. I've actually had to say this 5 or 6 times in a row because the person on the other side has so much momentum. Notice how people repeat the data of against us. Oh, and there's the time when you did this, and then there's time to do that. Oh, and remember the time you did that again. Yeah, I just heard that 3 times in the last 74 seconds. Why? Because new people from the village got curious and came up to the environment, and they're all going to judge who's right and who's wrong. And they've got to make sure that everybody that's here has heard that argument of a point. That's why we repeat the argument. Okay. So what am I going to say? I understand you got a point. You got a point. You got a point. I've even gone so far as to choke out, you're right. You're right about that. See, then I equivocated.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if they're actually not. It's that you say the words, and that immediately it throws water on the fire.
That's right.
And then you can kind of gently start into a crystal clear process.
Right.
But those words, you're right, are music to a narcissist's ears.
Then the next thing we say is, I need to ask you a question. Okay. So now we finally get a space for them to shut up for a second. Okay. And then we're going to go for, as Jen is talking about, the technique that we call crystal clear. I need to understand, and then we go and we try to get them to map out what is in their head about this. We're going to try to find the linchpin about where we're really disagreeing. Okay. There is a section of ground. The thing is, the argument puts a blowtorch over the entire battlefield. It's that basically we are doing a character assassination of them, and they are doing a character assassination of us. That's what happens in these arguments. Okay. Instead, we want to stop the character assassination process and try to essentially not win. Our job is to explore and understand and be able to define the narrow patch of ground here where we're actually having a disagreement. Okay, and we have to acknowledge the fact that, son of a gun, we may just disagree. Okay, and we may have to live with that we disagree, but we don't have to get carried over the cliff with respect to the characterological assassination process that is intrinsic to human argument. Okay, so how do you live with a narcissist? Very uncomfortably. Okay, so there better be tremendous values that narcissist brings to the table, and there may be. Okay, so but that is a hell of a relationship to try to have work. So the secret of good relationships is usually don't have a relationship with a narcissist. That would be the number one acknowledgement of the principle of identity, is that individual's personality will never improve. Okay, if they're a narcissist at 23, they were a narcissist at 13, they're going to be a narcissist at 93. That's how it is. Okay, so if you are staring at that situation and in a lot of emotional bankruptcy or pain about this, trying to figure out is there a way that I can manage this that make my life a lot better? No. You can make your life a little better by learning a few of the tools that we delineate. You can definitely do that, but you are not going to have what we would call a forklift upgrade in your life experience. We cannot take you from a 5 to a 7 in this life, not with that individual. We might take your life from a 5 to a 6. We might make it less unpleasant and therefore better.
There's an important piece here about, it's sort of repping for the more agreeable, especially agreeable women who are in a relationship with somebody like this. So a lot of super agreeable women might not necessarily see themselves in that description of the born to win scenario, right, because they're not actively representing their interests in that same way. They're not shouting back. They're not getting confrontational. They're just holding it in and quietly getting resentful and building their iceberg of a case against them until they get to a point where it really is too far. So it looks a little different in depending on where you are in the relationship and how much chiseling has been done of your goodwill as the agreeable person in this relationship. And so you said something very early on about, in the opposites attract question, where there is this exception where disagreeable people, highly disagreeable people do to some degree seek out more agreeable people, because those are the only people they can be in a stable relationship with. If they choose another disagreeable person, they're just fighting all the time. It's endless conflict. There's never any stability in that relationship. So they will seek out a highly agreeable person, but they will deceive that agreeable disagreeable person in the courtship process, and for some amount of time early in the relationship about just how disagreeable they are. So you don't see the extent of the narcissism immediately. So when we say don't get into a relationship with a narcissist, it's easier said than done, because you don't always know what you're dealing with, because part of their narcissism is deceiving you about that personality trait. They know it's not an attractive personality trait. They know it's kind of a bad deal. So they're walking through life wanting 80% of the pie. They're going to make it seem like with you, they're happy with 60%. They're a little disagreeable, but you find that sort of attractive because it's masculine, you like it, and it seems fair enough. You get your 40%, everything's good. But then slowly over the course of time, you see that they really want 80%, and you start to get chiseled and chiseled and chiseled, and you're sitting there with your 20% piece, and finally it's too much. And then you're in a very bad situation. So that's the usual trajectory for a disagreeable with a high agreeable, and it just requires a lot of mindfulness and a lot of crystal clear, and a willingness to recognize the true nature of that individual when it's made clear to you, and the limitations of the goodwill in that relationship.
Yeah, Jen also is alluding something. You can sort of see see why the book that we're writing is complicated and taking time. We have on our website, it says the book will be out in 2021.
I fixed that. I edited that.
Yeah, thank goodness.
It does say 2022 now.
But our website is the only place that you can get that book. It will not be offered for sale on Amazon or the general public. This is going to be where it's going to be. It's going to be in-house. And you can if you sign up for lifetime membership, you can get a signed copy of our it'll be a fancy hardcover book with over 50 illustrations. We've got an artist that's working on these details. But anyway,
you can see one of them if you read the chat. Yeah. There's a chapter on the website, so you can read a chapter, a sample chapter, and see the art and get a sense of what it is. Yeah.
And see just how long my beard's going to have to get.
Exactly.
Yeah,
we're in for it.
One of the things that Jen just alluded to is one of the principles that we discuss in this work, and that is going to be what we call deceptive altruism. So many nice people are deceptively altruistic. They will pretend that a trade proposition, particularly with a narcissist or somebody more disagreeable than they are, is fine. And the problem with this is that, as Jen was saying, the narcissist can be deceiving you, that they aren't quite that much of a pain in the ass, and therefore it seems reasonable. But this can also be being aided and abetted by the fact that you are deceiving them.
That it's all okay.
It's all okay.
And it's not okay.
So this gets to be this sort of very interesting problem in the management of these kind of conflicted relationships, even relationships where the person isn't necessarily that problematic, they're mildly problematic, but if you're a little too nice and we are deceptive in the fact that, oh no, that's fine with me. If we essentially give that message when it's really not fine, then as Jen says, you could start to build up resentment. And they actually wouldn't know that you're building resentment, because as far as they're concerned, you're completely fine with whatever it is. You're always, it's with whatever the possible conflict. So this is a
narcissist doesn't recognize your passive aggressive stewing, or you're closing the cabinet a little too hard, or you're stomping around a little bit. It doesn't register. It's like direct conflict or nothing. Otherwise, you're fine. There's no problem. Why should they? They're just going to try to take a little more because you seem fine with that. So they're going to go for 1% more. So passive aggression does not serve you if you're dealing with a high disagreeable.
Yeah. And so it's an interesting problem, because in all relationships, many people that have conscientiousness and certainly goodwill towards the relationship, and that are reasonably agreeable, they will abide by sort of an unwritten rule often, and it's a good one. And John Wooden calls this, the fine art of friendship, go more than halfway.
Mhm.
And so that actually is a good general rule that, okay, if we're running into a little stumbling block here, just go more than halfway. But the problem is, if you're with a narcissistic person, that stumbling block is happening every 72 hours.
At
You
least.
keep having to go more than halfway. Okay. And then if we're deceptive about it, and then it turns from an initial pleasant, mildly deceptive altruism where I'm willing to go more than halfway, but I don't intend this to be going on in a recurrent fashion indefinitely. It's that today I see that we happen to have a conflict that I wouldn't have normally anticipated. I'm willing to go more than halfway. No problem. Okay. But what if I'm with the narcissist? And now it's going to be a repetitive thing. Now the problem is that if we deceive them that it's okay, we simply calibrate them to a trade process that is really unsustainable for our happiness. And then, as Jen says, what happens is one day, not uncommonly, the quieter party in this whole thing eventually blows up a few times over a period of time, expecting this to recalibrate the narcissist, and it doesn't. And then finally, they're forced with a choice of a life of misery, or they're going to have to leave. Yeah. And so sometimes the narcissist can be very surprised when, little Miss Muffet decides to get off her tuffet and actually just frickin' leave. It's like, wait a minute. What about some counseling? Let's go talk. And they're very confident.
They go back. This is where all this ridiculous language in the narcissistic YouTube world comes from, the sort of the love bombing and all of that. They will go back to what they know worked before to get you. And so they go back into that deception mode where it's like, oh, you're right. I went too far, and I can do better, and I can change. And and so that's how it's going to go.
Yeah, that's it. Literally, those words you just said are ringing in my ear from a recent session.
Interesting.
Literally, somebody's literally living through almost verbatim. So that's is how that's going to go down.
Yeah.
All right, AJ, we have another question.
Yeah, well, yes, we do. Corey wants to know if either of you saw the Netflix documentary Bad Vegan, and if you could explain why someone stays in a relationship like that.
Have you seen it, Doug? This is about Sarma from Pure Food and Wine. It's really not quite a cult story. It's really just a highly agreeable woman sort of under the influence of an extremely disagreeable sociopath guy, to the point where she blows up her entire business and reputation and goes to jail in the end. So I think that it's a very complex story, but mostly this is just she has a personality that makes her vulnerable to a type of predation that is old as humanity itself. We actually, if you really look into it, we used to be even more disagreeable as a species. If you look at chimps, they are super disagreeable. They will kill each other on sight if they don't recognize. If you're from a different group of chimps, it's like you don't even get a hearing. You're just dead. So we've moved quite a ways to a more agreeable species, but there are still very manipulative, terrible. I mean, Doug has worked in the prison system and has met these people, and they are vicious and they are nasty and they will get what they want, and they zero in on their targets with great precision. And she was a walking target despite being very successful and not being a total pushover. You do discover in the documentary. I had a Twitter relationship with her. It's funny that the so much of the story is about her Twitter presence, because back in the day when Twitter was much more of a democratic playground, she and I both adopted our dogs around the same time and were equally obsessed with them. And so we would share pictures of our dogs back and forth. And so I felt, and she's a raw vegan, and I was interested in raw veganism, and there weren't that many people on Twitter who were. So I have this personal attachment to the story, and know that she's not a pushover. She does have a disagreeable streak, but she was in awe. She was in this guy's thrall of his strong, masculine, alpha male routine. And he made her ridiculous promises, like he had connections that could ensure the immortality of her dog. And this sounds crazy to us, right? It's like, how could anyone fall for that? But there are, there's a lid for every pot out there when it comes to vulnerable women and sociopaths.
Wow.
There's this incredible book that Doug got me to read called "And the Sea Will Tell." That is a similar story of a young woman who shacks up with a disagreeable sociopath narcissist type who gets her in major legal trouble. And when you read this story, named Buck, yes. Yeah. And it's, when you read these stories, you're like, what is she thinking? How can she be such an idiot? How can she not see? Everybody else sees. But this is deep in the female psyche. We are the more vulnerable sex in our ancestral history, and we look to men to provision and protect us. And the sort of dark side of that is that we can surrender free will to them in a way that allows us to be controlled and manipulated in really devastating ways. And I think that's what happened here.
Exactly. So AJ, you watch out for that Charles guy.
Yeah. It's hilarious. Hey, I think you guys will like this question because it's a perfect general question and you can go as deep as you want on it. It is from Nat. In the Big Five personality test, what personality traits are the hardest to have if somebody wanted to pursue either a long-term friendship or romantic relationship?
Well, in other words, if you had those, what would be your biggest obstacle?
Yeah, or maybe, yeah, like I that's how I'm interpreting it. Like
so many different, AJ, that's a really tough question because first of all, we go to the principle of identity, which it doesn't really matter because you are what you are and there's not a damn thing you can do to change it.
Sure, yeah.
Probably the most difficult thing would be extreme introversion. Because you're just, if you're really an extreme introvert, you're just not going to meet very many people and you're not going to want to. So I had some lovely young ladies in my practice over the last 30 years that would go years without any relationship and then maybe never have one. And they were such extreme introverts. Like the idea of going on a dating app and actually going out with anybody was just like, no, that's just too overwhelming. I'm not going to do it. So
it becomes more so the longer. We had a question on the podcast you missed this week because you were diligently working on the book, but Nate and I had a question from a woman who is sort of is afraid of men, is afraid of interacting with men, and not because of any bad experience with them, but she's basically conditioned herself through avoidance and baseline personality, just introversion and a little bit of instability. And so the more the longer, if you're afraid to drive on the freeway and you avoid the freeway for years, you're going to be even more afraid to take that on-ramp and get on the freeway when you need to. And so it's, we get in these grooves for sure. So extreme introversion, we could run down the list. I think high instability would be a problem. Obviously high disagreeableness is a problem. Sure. But this is context dependent. It's not a problem to be an introvert if you meet your Prince Charming restacking books at the library together and it's just the two of you in your private universe and you never need anyone else and you go home and watch Netflix and play Dungeons and Dragons or whatever librarians do. So it's only a problem if you're sort of aiming for the middle of the bell curve or trying to socialize with people who are significantly more extroverted than you are. And that's going to apply to all of these personality traits. I think it's a danger when we talk about the Big Five to assign value judgments to any of these personality characteristics. There's no good or bad personality. People will all the time come to us and say, "Oh, I have a bad personality. It's I'm this and I'm that and I'm this." It's just a bad personality for what? It's people have good personalities for some things and not optimal personalities for other things. With the pleasure trap, of course, there's the perfect personality, and there are personalities that struggle more with it. But the personalities that struggle with the pleasure trap are probably very good, Disney World hostesses.
They're really great salespeople.
Or salespeople, yeah. So it's all about context, and it's all about finding the right environment for who it is that you are, not trying to change yourself to fit yourself in an environment that is not suited for you.
Yeah, Jen calls that the potted plant theory, personality.
Mm-hmm.
Put yourself in the right environment. Don't try to make you the plant able to handle things that you can't handle.
Right, right.
That is great advice. Brooke says, should she wait to be at her ideal weight to date? She has about 30 to 40 pounds to lose.
Well, I would say a few things about that. And that is that, sort of what does the trend look like? If she has 30 or 40 pounds to lose, and have we had the same 30, 40 pounds to lose for the last 3 years, and we keep trying and nothing changes? Okay, so that's one set of circumstances. And in that set of circumstances, we would say, well, of course not. There would be no reason for us to we're not thinking that life is going to change that dramatically, et cetera. Now, if she's thinking, well, now I've lost 30 pounds in the last 6 months, and I've got 30 more to lose, but it looks like it's still happening. Well, then that's a completely different set of circumstances. I think Jen would probably say it doesn't hurt you to be in practice, to interview people, to essentially go through these experiences and get more used to them. There was a period of time, certainly for me, which continues to the present day. The last
not in their post-beard life, it won't. The whole new era.
Oh my God. I'm so surprised by that. I thought I was going to get just nothing but grief about this. But anyway, it's hilarious. But what happened at some point for me was I realized, I'm not that motivated to go out on this date. I wrote to this young lady. That's back in the days when I was writing to young ladies. Now it's more mature people I would write to. But I'd write to some young lady, and I looked at some things on her profile, and I thought, this is probably not a fit. I'm sensing big five conflicts, etc. But it's an opportunity. And I remember a catchphrase from the brilliant sales trainer Tom Hopkins, and the phrase was, "I never see failure as failure. It's just an opportunity to practice my techniques and perfect my performance." And so a date was an opportunity for me to go through this process and kind of know how it is that I was going to do things. And so I was certainly a better date after my 50th date than I was after my third one. Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and that's how I would look at this question from this lady. It's like, this is an opportunity for you to get used to this process, to get more comfortable with it. So no reason not to. And meanwhile, there's nothing like meeting Mr. Right but not being ready. Because if you meet Mr. Right and you weren't ready, you'll go home and kick yourself, and you're like, yeah, that's why I shouldn't have had this 30 pounds. Okay, that will light a fire that like sometimes nothing else will. And so it's like, okay, I'm not going to let that happen again. And that's another reason to not sit on the sidelines and wait till you're ready.
I think especially if you don't have a lot of experience with the online dating world, which is so weird, yes, that you have a lot of calibrating to do, and that calibrating is not specific to any weight. There's sort of a sense of the house of clowns that online dating is, yes, and sort of getting into that and getting a sense of the patterns and starting to build up the correlations between what people say in their profiles and what that translates to on the date, and just getting not just becoming a better date yourself and sort of having go-to stories, yeah, and all of those things that happen, but also just getting a feel for the whole weird dynamic of online dating and how bizarre it is. And there's also always, of course, the possibility that you do meet Mr. Right and you qualify just as you are. I mean, that is not,
Yes.
impossible to that, especially when we're talking about 30 pounds, it's
Yes.
entirely possible that
Yes.
you meet somebody who's quite attracted to you just where you're at, that you're attracted to back and you live happily ever after. So
Absolutely.
no, I don't think there's really any pressing reason to hold off on this.
Right. All good. Great, Jen.
There's a wonderful comment about Jen in the chat. This is my first time hearing Jen and seeing her in a video. I so appreciate her communication skills and intelligence, very straightforward and holds her own.
Yes.
Aw, thanks.
Absolutely.
Yeah. People are asking for advice for dating when older, postmenopausal, like they're saying, it kind of dries up literally and figuratively.
This is a family show, AJ.
It's actually always the same problems, whether you're
Yeah,
19
it really
or you're
is.
69. It's always, I can remember this gal I was talking to, and she scratches her head. She goes, how come the ones that I always want aren't interested in me, but the ones I'm not interested in are always interested in me?
Yeah,
Okay?
welcome to life. Yeah.
Welcome to life. Okay, and so that's why we call this the magic 10%. It's that occasionally in life we're fortunate that we get to a place where we meet somebody that they think we're special and we think they're special, and that's the magic. Okay, and but that magic, if it was easy to find, we wouldn't have the swirling cauldron of heartbreak and frustration and loneliness that we do. But the human nature is designed to be a tough negotiator. So even if you're quite an agreeable person, you will find that in the romantic arena, your ancestors were picky. Okay, they wanted it just so, and if it wasn't just so, a lot of times they're just going to pass. And their grandmother would say, "Oh, but he's a really good guy," and you're like, "Yeah, I know he's a good guy, but I've got, essentially my ancestral history is telling me no deal." And you can't change that. You can't make yourself like something that you don't like. And so we see right in front of us that human beings are tough negotiators, all of them. So I don't know anybody that's not a tough negotiator in this domain. So that's just how it is, and it's that way when you're 19, and it's that way. Well, I know for a fact that's true when you're 19, and it's not long before I'll know that that's true when you're 69.
I love this client that I had at some point. She's in her 80s. She's interested in some guy in his 90s at the senior center. But there's this young up and coming 77-year-old who wears the sparkly jacket to the weekly dance, and she's all flirtatious. It's like the same story. So his eyes wandering over to her, and yeah, it's really, it does not meaningfully change.
There you go.
If you have time for one more, Elizabeth says, is it really true that women are from Venus and men are from Mars?
That's a really actually underrated, very good book. Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of truth in that book.
There's a lot of truth in that book. There's a lot of BS in that book.
Yeah.
We don't want to give it a wholesale recommendation, but there's more truth than not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That John Gray actually put, almost, I think, unknowingly, put his thumb on a big issue that essentially conventional psychology and PC psychology, academic psychology, were ignoring. And that is that men and women are quite a bit different.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? And so that has been, obviously, when we look back at the history of man-woman relationships, we can see all kinds of reasons for the women's movement and the essentially feminism and all kinds of great authorship and a lot of bitter, angry, pissed off manifestos. All of that is legitimate part of human history. However, by 1990, it had arrived at the notion that, hey, we're all the same, and don't say that anybody's bigger or better or badder or different than the other. And it's like, that is complete BS, because we are extremely different. We are different, but we are absolutely, in the eyes of evolution, equivalent. In other words, we're equally important to the evolutionary process, and we have equal abilities with vis-a-vis nature, but the kinds of problems that we are really good at are different. So men are really good at throwing spears with force and deadliness and lust for the process. Okay.
Also known as football.
in social process and conversation and people's feelings and making sure that everybody's getting along okay and that everybody loves their food. These are unbelievably different minds. And so and John Gray happened to, in a very unsophisticated fashion, he's not a sophisticated guy. He's not an academically oriented psychologist at all. The guy's a marriage counselor. And God bless him, because he came out and said, listen, men are from Mars, women are from Venus. They're not the same. And essentially, the faster or the more completely we acknowledge our differences, then we're going to be able to address the conflicts there more intelligently. And that was, it was not just funny, but it had some deep insight.
Great. Thank you. Well, if people want more of either of you, you both do private consultations, right?
Sure do. And also, we have more of this type of thing where we talk about things on the Living Wisdom Library on the podcast that we do there. So that's available for folks. So yeah, we're here. This is what we do. And we wanted to do this, AJ, because we obviously we're deeply in Chef AJ's world of health, weight loss, optimizing your life experience, and these are super important, and they're actually psychologically complicated. But the ideas that we bring also span all other kinds of areas inside of human nature, and so that's we want people to know that that's true.
Well, thank you, and I'll make sure I have all the information to get in touch with both of you in the show notes.
Beautiful.
Sounds good.
Thank you, guys. This was really, really a wonderful presentation. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back in about 2 hours when Jackie Paternick is my guest. She is a 17-year-old who reversed her seizure disorder with a whole food plant-based diet. She's going to show you the recipes that made